Buses in New Jersey now have signs warning about radiation poisoning. Quote, September is National Preparedness Month. Do you know what to do in a radiation emergency? No, you don't. It doesn't matter. This is all make-believe. This is all play acting. If you live in a big metro area, there's not anything you're going to do during a nuclear exchange because you're going to be dead, along with most other Americans. The overwhelming majority of Americans will be dead. And those who survive will starve to death because all agriculture will be destroyed, along with billions of people around the planet. So it's time to update your assumptions about the technology here. These are not the bombs that flattened Nagasaki. They are incalculably more powerful. You hit New York, you take out Miami. So a nuclear war means not that we get to take out the Black Sea Fleet, it means the end of the world. And people who work around this stuff understand it, and they're really afraid. But no one else seems to have any idea. Why is that? Glenn Greenwald has been watching really carefully all of this unfold. His work is on Substack. We're happy to have him join us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. It seems to me no matter how you feel about Putin, or Ukraine or the justice of the war or anything, the threat, the very real, in-your-face threat of a nuclear exchange right now that they're openly talking about would require the media to start telling people, hey, this is real, but nobody is. And I wonder why that is.
If you look at the history of American wars, Tucker, over the last several decades, they're incredibly similar. The way they convince Americans to support U.S. involvement in a war is they personalize a particular leader, get us to hate that leader. Oh, Saddam Hussein in Iraq is a terrible guy. Bashar al-Assad in Syria is this tyrannical force. Mullah Omar in Afghanistan is somebody we have to go and take out. Gaddafi in Libya, and our emotions get up and we say, yeah, we can't, well, let's go take out these tyrants. And then, hundreds of billions of dollars later and lives lost, polls always show that Americans come to realize that they regard those wars as a mistake. And the reason is they realized that no benefits came to the United States and American citizens by virtue of U.S. involvement in those wars. So let's apply that framework here. The consensus in Washington is that we are closer to the use of nuclear weapons than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. There is a very real threat of a nuclear exchange or even a direct confrontation with Russia and the United States. And over what? Over who governs and rules not even Ukraine, but the Donbass, the eastern region in Ukraine, where a majority of people actually identify as ethnic Russians and want to be part of Russia. And yet there's almost no debate over whether we should be sending huge amounts of money there and risking the lives of American citizens through the possibility of a nuclear war, because everyone knows that the minute you step up and step out of line, there's a horde of people ready to call you unpatriotic or a traitor or an admirer of Vladimir Putin, as I know is being done with our very segment right this minute by all those Media Matter people and other people online. So it's a really repressive atmosphere, and it's squashing a debate that we absolutely have to have.
But we're losing track of reality. If a nation has nuclear weapons and you believe even theoretically they might use them, you have to treat that nation differently. You may not want to, it may be unfair, but that's why nations seek nuclear weapons, because you can't boss them around. If you ignore the possibility that your entire population could be killed, you are not fit for leadership because you're insane. And it feels like our leaders are right there. They're insane.
I think there's almost this sense that has been purposely cultivated to believe that the use of nuclear weapons really isn't a realistic possibility, even though we have had the use of nuclear weapons in the last century when the U.S. did it in Japan for World War II. And we came very close on at least 2 or 3 occasions. The U.S. and Russia did, these very same countries, to exchanging nuclear weapons and risking nuclear annihilation, including in the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the U.S. felt that the Russian presence over the border in Cuba was so threatening that we were going to have a nuclear war over it. That's how Russia sees what's happening in Ukraine right across their border. It is madness to assume that for Russia, what is an existential war, if they actually start losing it or NATO really starts escalating as we've been doing, that the chances of Vladimir Putin using nuclear weapons is zero. This is a dangerous delusion that I think a lot of people are operating under.
It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Let me just ask you, since you were in Brazil, we spoke to you for our documentary there, and at the time we were in Rio, and really up until about 20 minutes ago, we were told that Bolsonaro was going to get smoked yesterday in the national election. That didn't seem to happen. What is the state of that race right now?
I've never seen polling data and polling science collapse and be as humiliated as it was in Brazil. They didn't just get the presidential race radically wrong, but other races they got wrong by 20 or 30 points, always in favor of the Brazilian left and against the Bolsonarista. I would say now there's a runoff between Lula, the left-wing candidate, and Bolsonaro. I would put Lula as the favorite. He did come in first by 4 or 5 points. But even if Bolsonaro loses, Bolsonarismo, the force that the movement that he created, is incredibly powerful. The biggest party in the House and the Senate. They have governorships of the key states, and none of the polling data or the Brazilian media predicted that because they wanted, I think, to manipulate the outcome of the election through these fraudulent polling, or at the very least, polling that's radically wrong. So we'll see what happens on October 30th when the runoff takes place.
Yeah, not only in Brazil. Glenn, I want to hit you with breaking news here. So this is a Fox News alert. Air raid sirens blaring across Tokyo, obviously the biggest city in the world, in Japan. Government there warning that North Korea has apparently fired a ballistic missile into Japanese airspace. The Japanese in Tokyo being instructed to shelter indoors immediately. Of course, I believe our vice president was just in South Korea. Glenn, what do you make of this?
I mean, it's hard to analyze the specific event since it just happened, but what I will use it for is to, again, say that when you start talking about things like major countries using long-range missiles, a lot of times the reason escalation happens isn't even because the countries want it to, but because when hostilities are intensified enough, miscommunication and misperception happen. That's why when you get involved in a war like the one in Ukraine, things are incredibly dangerous. The world is a dangerous place. These weapons can kill hundreds of millions of people at once, and we are playing with fire, Tucker, by not even being willing to debate this out of fear that we're going to be called names. And I think it's crucial that we recognize the importance of it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's our job to say what we think is true regardless. So we're looking at pictures right now of air raid sirens in Tokyo. Certainly all of this adds up, at least at first glance, to a world in turmoil that is in some very deep way resetting, you know, those post-war norms and institutions that we often hear the foreign policy people describe seem to be collapsing to some extent around the world.
Yeah, you know, I think it's pretty ironic that for all the accusations about Donald Trump, that he was a Kremlin agent, that he was willing to hand over the world to Vladimir Putin, it is true that none of these things happened during the Trump administration. The Russians annexed Crimea under President Obama. They invaded Georgia under President Bush. Nothing happened during the Trump years with all of this kind of instability, and now we're seeing it again. And I think the reason, in part, is because people look at Joe Biden and know that he's a doddering leader who has clearly lost much, if not most, of his mental capacity. And when you see a leader like that, a lot of countries around the world see that as a signal to start exploiting the situation for their own interests. I believe that's absolutely a factor.
It's the drunk stepdad, do what you want. No, it's completely right. Glenn Greenwald, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Tucker. Thanks.
Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly opens, stories that are changing the world and changing your life. From Tucker Carlson tonight.